Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be going in depth into my week number 16 top 10 waiver wire ads of the week. But before we could get into things, I would like to ask that if you guys are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, that you please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure that you leave a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton. If you want to follow me on Twitter, please do so at NotoriousFantasy. Today's video is being brought to you guys by BetMGM, who we'll be talking about a little bit later. So without further ado, let's get into my top number 10 waiver wire ads for week number 16. We begin with my number 1 waiver wire pickup of the week, Tyler Allgeier, running back of the Atlanta Falcons, going up against the Baltimore Ravens in Baltimore this week, currently owned in 37% of leagues on Yahoo. So if you play on NFL, CBS, ESPN, any of those other fantasy football platforms, then the ownership percentage is going to be slightly different, though I will note in some cases there could be a drastic difference in ownership percentage. So week 15 up against the New Orleans Saints. In New Orleans, Allgeier was the running back 7 on the week in half PPR. Also important to note that this is being recorded prior to Monday Night Football, so if someone outscores Tyler Allgeier, then he might move down a spot or two. 17 rushes for 139 yards and a score, as well as 1 reception on 1 target for -3 yards. Caleb Huntley is now out for the season with an Achilles injury. Now it is going to be Patterson and Allgeier as the main 2 backs on the team. And over the last couple of games, it's pretty clear that Allgeier is playing better than Cordero Patterson. In the last 4 games, Tyler Allgeier is averaging 8.2, 5.2, 4.9, and 6.9, very nice, I like, yards per carry. So while Tyler Allgeier isn't necessarily the most sexy running back, because of course he plays on the fucking Atlanta Falcons, which are a bit of a disaster, but at the end of the day, if this guy keeps seeing touches, and the team has shown us that they want to run the ball at a very high rate, despite the fact that they might be getting absolutely torched in a game, they still want to run the ball. He could easily see 15 plus rushes this week against Baltimore. I like Tyler Allgeier a bunch going forward. At number 2, we have Zack Moss, running back of the Indianapolis Colts, going up against the LA Chargers at home in Indianapolis, 3% owned on Yahoo. So Jonathan Taylor suffered a sprained ankle on Saturday, and based upon all that I've read, it really isn't all that serious of an injury. But the fact is, the Indianapolis Colts are dead in the fucking water, right? There's no way the Indianapolis Colts can make the playoffs. So there is zero reason for the team to roll out an injured version of Jonathan Taylor for the rest of the season so that maybe he can get hurt again, right? That would make absolutely zero sense. So I would be perplexed, shocked if we saw Jonathan Taylor again this season. This now leads to Zack Moss and Deon Jackson being the guys on the team. Zack Moss outsnapped Deon Jackson 67-32 last week. Week 15 at the Minnesota Vikings, Moss was the RB, 35.5 PPR, having 24 rushes for 81 yards and 1 target for 0 receptions. Now, later on in today's video, we are going to be talking about Deon Jackson. And I would not be surprised at all if we pick up Zack Moss and then Deon Jackson ends up being the quote-unquote better ad because he's more of the pass-catching back. But even though the Colts are such a disaster, they continue to try to run the ball. And with Zack Moss being the lead back, especially in a matchup up against the garbage LA Chargers defense against the run, they're terrible, we could see Zack Moss have quite the solid Sunday. Next up, we move to number 3, Zay Jones of the Jacksonville Jaguars, going up against the New York Jumbo Jets in MetLife. Now, you've probably heard me talk about Zay Jones before, so I might sound like a bit of a broken record, but the motherfucker is only owned in 55% of leagues on Yahoo. Even after 5 straight games with 7 or more targets, and in 4 or 5 of those games, he had 6 or more receptions. And even though it starts to feel like Jones is the wide receiver 1 on the team, not Christian Kirk, he's still only owned in 55% of leagues. Week 15 up against the Dallas Cowboys, he took a dump on their chest. Wide receiver 1.5 PPR, 6 receptions on 8 targets for 109 yards, and not 1, not 2, 3 touchdowns. I know he's going up against the Jets, Sauce Gardner, all these guys, blah, blah, blah. The Jacksonville Jaguars are on fire, and Zay Jones is also on fire. I always advise for you to continue to ride the hot streak, and now, in some leagues, 45% of leagues apparently, you can hop on board on the Zay Jones bandwagon in week number 16, and league winner doesn't do justice to this guy. Is a huge league winner. This guy will win you your league if you pick him up right now. So that's why I'm advocating for him so heavily. At number 4, we have Treylon Burks of the Tennessee Titans going up against the Houston Texans. 49% owned on Yahoo. Now, he hasn't played since week number 13. In week 13, the game that he got hurt in up against the Eagles in Philadelphia. Wide receiver 36.5 PPR, having 1 reception on 1 target for 25 yards and a touchdown. He also had 2 solid games prior to that. I honestly thought Burks would probably come back last week. He didn't end up doing so. I would be pretty shocked if they didn't bring him back this week. Now, while the Titans team as a whole is not the best, right? Everyone kind of acknowledges that they're pretty shit. At the end of the day, they're still a team that should make the playoffs. So it's not like with Jonathan Taylor where it's like, ooh, Burks might be this new shiny star on this team, right? This guy we need to keep healthy. Well, we might make the playoffs, so you're going to have to bring Treylon Burks back. It's not like they're just restricting him because they aren't going to go far into the playoffs, right? So Treylon Burks is a guy that I would have to believe plays this week, and he gets the Texans defense should be a pretty solid matchup for him. At number 5, we have Deon Jackson of the Colts going up against the LA Chargers at home in Indy. 7% owned on Yahoo. Week 15 up against the Minnesota Vikings in Minnesota. RB 26.5 PPR. 13 rushes for 55 yards. 1 reception on 1 target for a yard and a touchdown. Now again, Deon Jackson was heavily outsnapped by Mr. Zack Moss. Zack Moss, 67% of snaps. Deon Jackson, 32%. So I'm still advocating more for Zack Moss, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't put in a claim for Deon Jackson, because if you're in a really bad spot, maybe you have Jonathan Taylor, someone picks up Zack Moss, you get Deon Jackson, like, in this matchup against a garbage Chargers defense, you can still play Deon Jackson. Now, you're not going to hear me come on here and be like, Deon Jackson's must start or something like that, but you definitely could start him if you were in a pickle. Next up, we move to number 6, Chubba Hubbard of the Carolina Panthers going up against the Lions at home in Carolina. 39% owned on Yahoo. Week 15 versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. RB 33.5 PPR, tied with Isaiah Pacheco, who had a real disappointing game for me because I really liked Pacheco last week. 4 rushes for 10 yards, 3 receptions on 3 targets for 57 yards. And he out-snapped Foreman by a wide margin. 63% of the snaps to Hubbard, 30% to Foreman, 4% to Blackshear. And the Lions defense is pretty good against the run. So again, it's not like I'm advocating for Hubbard to be a must start, but we're in the playoffs. Things are going to happen. Players are going to get hurt, and you want to make sure you have the depth to go over the top in week number 16, week 17, in case something happens, right? Players get hurt all the time. Jonathan Taylor got hurt last week. So if Foreman was to get hurt, then Chubba Hubbard could be a league winner in week 17. Even if Foreman doesn't get hurt, Hubbard might be the number 1 running back on this team. And while the Lions defense has looked better against the run, we all know this, like, if everything goes right, this could be a tit-for-tat, super high-scoring game, and Chubba Hubbard could be very valuable in this spot. Before we move to players 7 through 10 to close out today's video, I would like to give you guys a quick word for our friends and our sponsor over at BetMGM. In the spirit of giving through the holiday season, BetMGM has partnered up with us to offer a $25 free bet on top of their first bet insurance of up to $1,000 to new players who sign up to a new BetMGM account. Link down below in the video description or in the pinned comment to activate the offer. This free bet promo will only be offered during Christmas week from December 19th to December 26th. Again, all you have to do is simply follow the link to sign up for an account with BetMGM down below, deposit $10 or more to receive a free $25 bet, and then you could also shoot for the moon with your first wager. If your first bet loses, BetMGM will give you a free bet credit equal to the amount of your first bet up to $1,000. So make sure you guys check that out. Link in the video description or in the pinned comment. So back on into things. Now I move to player number 7 here. Chig Oknonkwo, tight end of the Tennessee Titans, the Les Titans, going up against the Houston Texans this week at home. 29% owned on Yahoo. A bit of a down game for Chig last week up against the Chargers in LA. Tannehill got hurt. Tannehill comes back. Real weird game. Tight end 15.5 PPR, 4 receptions on 5 targets for 54 yards, 1 rush for 6 yards. He's had 4 straight games with 5 or more targets. And again, some people in the playoffs now, they might have Kelsey. They might have Kittle, right? They might not have the need to pick up a tight end. But if you're constantly looking at the waiver wire, you need to pick up Chig, because while he might not blast off this week to be tight end number 1, I think that's possible against Houston, but I'm just not saying that's a lock to happen, obviously. Chig is only owned in 29% of leagues. He's proven that he is a utilized commodity in this offense with Burks and without Burks. So, again, this is really one of the safest tight ends you can pick up with a ton of upside, especially up against the Texans defense. At number 8, we have Danny Dimes, quarterback of the New York Football Giants, going up against the Minnesota Vikings in Minnesota. 59% owned on Yahoo. Week 15 up against the Commanders in Washington. Quarterback 24, probably his, or if this wasn't the worst performance, it has to be one of the worst performances out of him on the year, because he's been really consistent as a top 15, 16 option every single week. 21 completions on 32 attempts for 160 yards, 10 rushes for 35 yards. Now, while Daniel Jones does and is prone to make mistakes, he's going up against one of the worst defenses in the National Football League in the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings made the Indianapolis Colts in the first half look like a fucking powerhouse offense. So you better believe that Danny Dimes has the upside to be a top 5 quarterback in this spot up against the Vikings defense. Again, the game is in Minnesota. At number 9 here, we move to Chris Moore of the Houston Texans, wide receiver, going up against the Tennessee Titans. This week in Tennessee, 19% owned. This pickup is assuming that Nico Collins and Brandon Cooks miss yet again. If one of them is healthy, then I think Chris Moore should be all right. But if they both play, then just fucking don't play Chris Moore, right? Just stay away from the situation. 2 straight games with 9 or more targets. Last week against the Chiefs, he disappointed. Wide receiver 51.5 PPR, tied with I'm Rick James, bitch, Richie James of the Giants. 4 receptions on 9 targets for 42 yards, but still had 9 targets. I know he didn't do the most with it, but you got to chase volume in fantasy football. This guy's going to see volume if Brandon Cooks and Nico Collins miss. So I think that Chris Moore is a pretty solid add. And I noticed that on NFL, he's owned in a decent amount more leagues than on Yahoo. At number 10, to close out today's video, we got Marquise Goodwin of the Seattle Seahawks going up against the Chiefs in Kansas City. This week, 3% owned on Yahoo. Week 15 up against the Niners, wide receiver 81.5 PPR, 2 receptions on 5 targets for 10 yards, though he has had back-to-back games with 5 or more targets. And with Lockett expected to miss several games, we know now that Goodwin is locked in as the wide receiver number 2 behind DK Metcalf. Now, I know Geno Smith has had some up and down games, and the Chiefs defense, though, isn't the greatest. So it wouldn't surprise me if Goodwin had that game in him where maybe he finishes inside the top 12. Now, again, am I going to rank him inside the top 12? Of course not. Of course I'm not going to be that crazy. But is it possible? Especially in deeper leagues? If you lost Lockett, he's not necessarily a plug-and-play because there's a bunch of receivers better than Goodwin, but at the same time, like, if you're in a real predicament, like a 14-team league, you lost Lockett, there's way worse options than Goodwin out there. So thank you guys all so much for watching. If you did end up enjoying, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below as well as that like button. It would help me out a ton. If you want to follow me on Twitter, please do so at NotoriousFNTSY. Today's video is brought to you guys by BetMGM. Make sure you check them out. Link in the video description down below. I love you guys all so much. Hope you have a great rest of your guys' day. And as always, good.